Hello, today is Wednesday, May 29th, and welcome to episode 341 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Morgan Vigna, and I'm joined today by NSI's Executive Director, Jamil Jaffer, NSI Deputy Executive Director, Jessica Jones, and my fellow Senior Fellow, Lester Munson. So today we are talking about the mounting international pressure on Israel over the war in Gaza. Last week, Karim Khan, prosecutor for the ICC, International Criminal Court, announced that he is applying for arrest warrants for 3 Hamas leaders and Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant. The Biden administration and members of Congress denounced the charges against Israel, and many have criticized the ICC for its implied moral equivalence between Hamas, a U.S.-designated terrorist organization, and Israel. Shortly after, the governments of Spain, Ireland, and Norway announced that they would officially recognize a Palestinian state. While 140 UN member states recognize Palestinian statehood, very few Western powers do. Prime Minister Netanyahu called the move a reward for terror and recalled Israeli ambassadors from the 3 countries. Meanwhile, on the ground in Rafah, Israel bombed a displacement camp, killing several Hamas terrorists, as well as dozens of civilians. Netanyahu has called this strike a tragic accident. While these events are bad news for Israel, they also have major implications for the future of the region's stability, where Israel has long been a beacon of democracy and Western ideals. So, Jess and Jamil, I'm going to turn to you both first. Jess, you studied international law, and Jamil, you happen to be a lawyer. So, I'm going to get your take on this.
Not a very good one.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're really. Well, you happen to be the chief counsel for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, so I think that gives you at least some level of credibility.
Former.
So I want to get your take on the ICC case here. The United States isn't a signatory to the ICC, and neither is Israel, for that matter. But Washington has obviously been under a lot of domestic pressure, here at home to curb its support for Israel. What do you think the Biden administration's response to these events is going to be?
Jess, I think that's aimed at you first. Okay, you're the real lawyer in the room.
I will say, not only did I study international law, I actually worked at the ICTY and ICTR, which is up the street from the ICC.
What? So you're part of the problem.
I knew that was coming, but I had to drop that in there anyways, because I would think the ICTY and the ICTR are a little less politicized-ish than the ICC. But that being said, I think, it's like you said, Morgan, it's been a rough couple of weeks for Israel, especially when it comes to the international law junket. In addition to the ICC request for arrest warrants, the ICJ also ruled, many would argue, against Israel last Friday when it comes to their operations in Rafah. There's some ambiguity there that Israel would argue, but that might give some top cover for those that are protesting Israel operations in Rafah and give them a little more legal justification. I think the Biden administration it could be boxed in. I mean, they supported the ICC when it comes to arrest warrants for Putin, and actually has, we've been trying to send in more funding, intelligence when it comes to the investigation against Putin and war crimes conducted by Russia. But it's no surprise that U.S. supports the International Criminal Court and international law when when it's advantageous. You can look at Sudan and Darfur. So it wouldn't be the first time when it comes to Russia that the U.S. support the court. But right now, as the president said, it's outrageous. There's, they're getting pressure from congressional leaders to also speak out and take action against the arrest requests, the warrants. But I think the ICJ ruling actually is pretty important as well. I think you might start to see European unity when it comes to Israel's support breaking, which you mentioned, Israel, Norway, and Spain announcing and recognizing Palestine. You have a number of other countries that are also Slovenia, Belgium, Malta, and Luxembourg that are going to probably announce shortly, or that's what experts are saying. And you might actually see some economic impact hitting Israel. You have the EU foreign ministers anonymously voting on Monday to review their association agreement with Israel. Europe is Israel's main trading partner. And if it comes down to hitting them with the purse, it might go beyond words and just verbal protests against Israel and actually see it hurt Israel's bottom line. And that'll put even more pressure on U.S. support for Israel.
Jamil?
I just see Emmanuel Macron with a purse hitting Benjamin Netanyahu
really nice
over
purse,
the head.
though. It's really nice.
That would be a good meme.
There you go. So meme
Meme.
So there you go.
Oh, you're
All
French.
Right.
That's why it's mem. See, that's what I do.
French. That's what it is. Okay. So, well, look, I mean, I think the real challenge here is that the ICC, Karim Khan, the prosecutor, has played it very smart. He only came after Israel and sought to indict Netanyahu on a couple of charges, Netanyahu and the defense minister Yoav, on a couple of charges, right? Specifically related to starvation as a tactic of war. He didn't go after these big genocide plays or attacks on civilians. In fact, to the contrary. He went after the Hamas defendants for a whole litany of charges, including aggressive forms of war and the like. And so it's a very smart play in the sense that it makes it very hard for the ICC panel to not indict all of the people involved. And so the pressure's on from both sides. There's a political pressure on the judges to do the right thing. There's pressure on from the prosecutor to try and get the ball moving on charges. And then the real question is, even if they do issue arrest warrants, which they haven't yet, will anybody enforce them? Will Interpol issue a red notice for Bibi Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant? I mean, it seems crazy, but then it's Europe, so who knows? But more to come on that. The ICJ decision, just another sort of question about whether ICJ has any legitimacy whatsoever. ICC, I think, facing similar problems, and the reality on the ground is, none of this actually is going to make a bit of difference, because at the end of the day, Israel is going to continue to prosecute this war until the hostages are back, until Hamas is destroyed, and Hamas is going to keep holding the hostages until they think that they're out of options. And so all that's happening is that these plays on the international scene are stretching this conflict out, ending up with more civilians dead, and that's the real problem here. The goal should be to end the conflict, and that means hostages coming back and Hamas being off the table. And by the way, the last thing on this issue of recognizing the Palestinian state, that's all fine and well, but let's be real. What control does the Palestinian Authority have over Gaza? Zero. And really over the West Bank even? I mean, they're essentially ineffective. In part, they've been so successful at working with Israel that they made themselves ineffective amongst their own population. So the real question is, what government have they actually recognized, and what effectiveness does that government have in the relevant area in Gaza today? None. So what does it mean that Ireland, Spain, Norway did it? I think they're just making themselves, once again, look irrelevant. There's a time and appropriate place for a two-state solution and the recognition of a Palestinian state. We are not there today.
Yep. So, Les, what do you think the Biden administration's response should be, and what role does Congress have in this?
Those are excellent questions, Morgan. First, a couple of points. One, I'm embarrassed by my Norwegian cousins for their move here. Second, fun fact
forefathers.
Say again.
Forefathers. Your forefathers.
Cousins. They're not really, these are the descendants of my forefathers. These are the people who couldn't make it out of Norway.
Weren't smart enough to bail.
Weren't smart enough to leave. Fun fact about Karim Khan, the prosecutor, his old client is Charles Taylor, the murderous former president of Liberia, who is now serving a 50-year sentence in a UK prison for war crimes. I think Khan was on better ground defending Taylor than he is with this current effort. And further, this ratifies John Bolton's idea that international law is kind of a joke. And it behooves the Biden administration, which believes in multilateral action, kind of a Wilsonian approach to multilateral diplomacy and that kind of thing, to squelch this kind of activity, because it really is counterproductive for the effort in the Middle East. The ICC moves, the recognition by these three countries of some sort of Palestinian state. The Biden administration should be fighting against that if it wants to assert that the United Nations and other international organizations can be effective organs of U.S. diplomacy and national security strategy.
All right. Well, there you have it. International law is a joke, and Jamil Jaffer may or may not be drafting an AUMF for The Hague. That's a wrap.
Do it.
That's a wrap. Thanks to Devlin Burney, Claude Jennings, Alice Roosevelt, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Friday, May 31st, for our next episode of Fault Lines. Fault Lines is now available on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.